The ruling coalition in DR Congo has launched an election center which it says is aimed at giving logistical support and sensitizing the population ahead of the vote. But critics have criticized that move, saying that the coalition wants to interfere with the outcome of the election.
After weeks of wrangling and false starts, Congo's opposition leaders signed a deal on New Year's Eve, December 31, with the party of President Joseph Kabila in Kinshasa that will require the president to step down after elections that must happen before the end of 2017. But the election center could widen the rift of mistrust between the ruling coalition and opposition parties who say it will be used to interfere with the electoral process. The ruling coalition insists that the aim of the center is to educate the Congolese people on the upcoming elections and offer other technical support to all parties during campaigns. The electoral center is not meant to interfere with the running of the electoral process, but rather it is a supporting tool that aims to give technical, organizational, financial support as well as help parties during campaigns. But opposition members are warning against any distraction from the main focus of the deal, which is to hold elections this year. We have a deadline, which is December 2017, and the Congolese people will not allow for another sliding of the electoral calendar again. So we have to be honest with them and stick to the agreement. We need a new government in place. Despite the deal between the ruling coalition and opposition parties, huge hurdles remain. The Electoral Commission has said elections may not be possible before 2018, and many doubt that President Kabila really intends to stand down. On the streets of the capital, Kinshasa, many share the opposition's skepticism and question the need for a political party to have its own election center. When it comes to the election center, I can say that most of the Congolese people do not understand why a political party needs to have an electoral center. It is good to be innovative, but we have to make sure that we do not confuse an electoral center of a political movement to a national electoral center. Diplomats fear growing unrest can trigger a repeat of the wars that killed millions, unleashed scores of predatory armed groups, and drew in more than half a dozen neighboring armies between 1996 and 2003.
The Supreme Court in London has cleared the way for a Libyan man to take legal action after he claimed Britain was involved in his kidnap and covert transportation to Tripoli in 2004. Abdul Hakim Belhaj alleges that the British Secret Service, MI6, provided information that led to him being detained with his wife in Thailand and then flown to Tripoli, where they were both tortured. Among the people Mr. Belhaj wants to sue is the former British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw, who was responsible for MI6 at the time. Mr. Straw, however, rejects claims that he had been aware of the rendition. Abdul Hakim Belhaj was an opponent of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, but was once regarded by Western intelligence services as a terrorism suspect. The United Nations has criticized South Sudan's government for failing to pursue justice after grave human rights abuses, including killings and gang rapes, were committed during an explosion of violence in the capital, Juba, in July. Forces loyal to President Salva Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar engaged in 5 days of street battles with anti-aircraft guns, attack helicopters and tanks. The UN mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, and the UN Human Rights Office says it documented 217 cases of rape, including gang rape, committed by the Sudan People's Liberation Army and other armed groups from July 8th to 25th. The South Sudan government is yet to respond to these comments. Political rivalry between Kiir and ethnic Dinka and his former deputy Machar in Nuer led to civil war in 2013 that has often followed ethnic lines. The pair signed a shaky peace agreement in 2015, but fighting has continued. The International Criminal Court has resumed the trial of Lord's Resistance Army Top Lieutenant Dominic Ongwen. He is a former child soldier who faces 70 charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
The prosecution placed its first witness, Tim Allen, on the stand, an expert who wrote a book on the Lord's Resistance Army. Mr. Allen told the court he lived extensively in the region of South Sudan and northern Uganda and followed LRA since its creation.
I first went to South Sudan in 1980. I lived in South Sudan for 4 years. I spent some 18 months of that period working in the Acholi area of South Sudan, the areas around Palataka, actually, where the Lord's Resistance Army later had a base. Subsequently, I lived in northern Uganda. I lived there for about 3 years altogether, working in Madi and Acholi populations.
Ongwen, who was abducted and pressed into service as a young teenager in 1988 in the group's guerrilla war against the government of Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni, pleaded not guilty to charges including murder, rape and child kidnapping while fighting in Joseph Kony's Lord Resistance Army, saying Kony, not he, was behind the rebel group's rampage in northern Uganda. Ongwen faces 70 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity for attacks in refugee camps in northern Uganda between 2002 and 2005, including committing or directing acts of rape, sexual enslavement, and of conscripting child soldiers. The charge sheet was expanded to focus on sex crimes when Ongwen gave himself up last year after a decade on the run. The case is the first to charge forced marriage and forced pregnancy, where women were made pregnant against their will. The ICC brought charges against Ongwen, Kony and 4 others who are believed dead in 2005. Ongwen gave himself up to US troops fearing for his life after falling out with Kony, who is still at large.
In North Africa, reports say at least 8 police officers have been killed and 3 others wounded in an attack by Islamist militants on a security checkpoint in Egypt's New Valley province in the Western Desert. State television said the attack took place yesterday night in the Nakib checkpoint, more than 600 kilometers southwest of the capital, Cairo. The Interior Ministry says at least 2 of the attackers were killed. No group has claimed responsibility for the violence. Egypt is facing a more than 3-year-old Islamist insurgency led by the Islamic State militant group. The insurgency is largely contained in the Sinai Peninsula, but there have been occasional attacks in the Western Desert, which borders Libya, where Islamic State is also active.